Imagine a torment so profound, so absolute, that it strips away your very being, all because of a feature you were born with. This was the chilling fate of Sporus, a young slave in ancient Rome, whose misfortune was to possess a face that mirrored a dead empress. When Emperor Nero, consumed by grief and spiraling into madness after the violent death of his wife, Poppaea Sabina, encountered Sporus, he saw not a person, but a perverse echo of his lost love. What followed became a macabre chapter in history, a testament to unchecked power and the depths of imperial delusion. Sporus was castrated, forced to don the garments of a woman, and coerced into a grotesque parody of marriage with the most powerful man in the world. His suffering wasn't punishment. It was the monstrous offspring of Nero's fractured psyche. And yet, even after Nero's demise, Sporus's ordeal was far from over. This is the harrowing chronicle of how a simple physical resemblance could utterly obliterate a life, a cautionary tale that resonates even across millennia. To truly understand the tragedy that engulfed Sporus, we must first gaze upon the woman whose spectral presence haunted him. Poppaea Sabina. She was more than merely beautiful. She possessed a magnetic, almost predatory beauty, capable of ensnaring emperors, igniting conflicts, and toppling dynasties. Already twice married, Poppaea effortlessly captivated Nero. Her second husband, Marcus Salvius Otho, enjoyed Nero's close confidence. Yet, in the cutthroat arena of Roman politics, where imperial caprice was law, friendship was a flimsy shield. Nero summarily banished Otho to a desolate province, effectively exiling him, and claimed Poppaea as his own. Such acts exposed the casual barbarity and utter disregard for human connection that defined Nero's reign. Poppaea wielded remarkable sway over Nero, arguably more than he wielded over Rome itself. A shrewd manipulator, she expertly exploited his insecurities and desires to fuel her ambitions. It was Poppaea who subtly steered Nero toward orchestrating the murder of his own mother, Agrippina the Younger. While this act may appear shockingly depraved, the truth of their relationship was far from familial. Agrippina had repeatedly attempted to poison Nero, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion within the imperial palace. Moreover, Agrippina herself had seized power through treacherous means, including the suspected poisoning of her husband, Emperor Claudius. Thus, when Poppaea suggested Agrippina's removal, it was less a case of convincing a loving son to commit matricide and more about persuading him to conclude a long-standing and bloody family feud. This subtle art of persuasion, preying on existing tensions and vulnerabilities, continues to echo through history, showcasing the potent force of psychological manipulation in achieving political ends. Poppaea's aspirations knew no bounds. She relentlessly pressured Nero to divorce and ultimately execute his first wife, Octavia. Octavia's primary offense, in Poppaea and Nero's eyes, was her perceived lack of allure and her rightful claim to the imperial throne. In a world awash in intrigue, conspiracies, and savage ambition, being a steadfast, virtuous, and drama-free spouse was a fatal flaw. Ancient historians consistently portray Poppaea as ambitious, calculating, and devastatingly beautiful. With her signature golden tresses, which set the standard of beauty throughout the empire, she was, in essence, the ancient world's ultimate femme fatale. Beautiful, manipulative, and lethal to anyone who dared to impede her ascent. Poppaea was a force of nature, a prime example of how individuals can harness their charm, intellect, and ruthlessness to conquer the social and political landscape. Yet, Poppaea ultimately committed a fatal error. She conceived a child in 65 AD. During her pregnancy with their second child, she foolishly criticized Nero for his tardiness after the chariot races. This seemingly insignificant act unleashed Nero's volatile temper, fueled by alcohol and unchecked authority. In a blind rage, Nero kicked her in the abdomen with such force that she died almost instantly. With a single act of impulsive violence, the emperor extinguished the life of the one person he genuinely cherished, shattering his already fragile sanity. The most powerful man in the world was suddenly engulfed by an overwhelming tide of grief and guilt. He staged elaborate funeral games that stretched for days, a grotesque spectacle of remorse and sorrow. He ordered Poppaea's body to be preserved with exotic spices rather than cremated, an honor usually reserved for foreign monarchs. He even attempted to have her deified, highlighting the extreme measures he would take to atone for his actions. But none of his extravagant displays could resurrect her, and Nero's grief soon transformed into a bizarre and perilous obsession. If he could not bring Poppaea back to life, perhaps he could recreate her image. After Poppaea's death, Nero plunged into what can only be described as his deranged mourning period. The same man who had masterminded the murders of his own mother and first wife was now crippled by grief. It appeared that murdering family members was merely a matter of political expedience for Nero, but inadvertently killing the woman he truly loved triggered a complete mental collapse. The emperor became fixated on finding a replacement for Poppaea, not just any replacement, but a perfect double. He launched an empire-wide search, seeking women who bore an uncanny resemblance to his deceased wife. This can be seen as a disturbingly twisted casting call. Wanted, a fair-haired beauty to become the emperor's consort, must be identical to the former consort in every detail. Former consort met an untimely demise. Discretion is essential, but Nero's obsession took an even more peculiar turn. None of the women he discovered were deemed satisfactory. Their noses lacked the precise curve, their hair fell short of the perfect golden hue, or they simply failed to fill the Poppaea-shaped void in Nero's broken mind. The emperor behaved like a demented Goldilocks, rejecting each candidate with arbitrary criticisms. This one is too petite, that one is too statuesque. This one simply does not evoke the memory of my beloved, dearly departed wife, whom I, in a moment of regrettable excess, accidentally killed. Nero even went so far as to marry a woman named Statilia Messalina, but that union also failed to appease his twisted desires. Messalina had the misfortune of being an individual in her own right, rather than a Poppaea replica. The marriage was doomed from the outset. As Nero wasn't seeking a wife, he was seeking a resurrection, a way to undo his terrible deed and revive his lost love. Meanwhile, the Roman populace watched their emperor's increasingly erratic behavior with growing apprehension. This was the same man who was rumored to have fiddled while Rome burned, who brazenly performed on stage like a common entertainer, and who now appeared to be suffering a very public mental breakdown over his dead wife. Even by the already permissive standards of Roman imperial conduct, this behavior was becoming increasingly alarming. Whispers of discontent began to spread throughout the city, as citizens questioned the sanity and stability of their ruler. But Nero's madness was far from reaching its apex. If he could not find an exact female copy of Poppaea, perhaps he needed to reconsider his strategy. Perhaps he needed to embrace a more imaginative interpretation of his desires. It was at this juncture that his gaze fell upon a young slave named Sporus. Sporus was likely simply trying to navigate his daily existence when fate intervened and dramatically altered the trajectory of his life. As a young slave, perhaps still in his teens, residing somewhere within the vast Roman Empire, his primary concerns would have been avoiding the wrath of his master and securing enough sustenance to survive. Little did he suspect that he was about to experience the most devastating twist of fate imaginable. He had the misfortune of bearing a striking resemblance to a dead empress. Imagine the instant Nero first set eyes on him. The emperor's eyes would have widened in disbelief, his heart would have skipped a beat, and Sporus's life would have been irrevocably transformed. It was as if Sporus had won the most dreadful lottery in human history. Congratulations, you have been awarded a one-way ticket to imperial insanity. What were Sporus's physical attributes? Ancient accounts describe him as possessing delicate, almost effeminate features and the same golden hair that had made Poppaea a celebrated beauty throughout the empire. In any other context, these features might have been considered advantageous, attributes that could have brought him favor or opportunity. But under Nero's obsessive gaze, they became a death warrant, adorned with layers of torment. The resemblance was so uncanny that it reportedly sent shivers down Nero's spine. This wasn't just a fleeting likeness. It was as if Poppaea had risen from the grave. Some historians have even speculated that Sporus may have been related to Poppaea, perhaps a distant cousin or the offspring of a relative who had been enslaved. For Sporus, the moment of recognition must have been utterly terrifying. Slaves learned to interpret their master's expressions for survival, and whatever Sporus saw in Nero's face that day could not have been comforting. Perhaps he saw obsession, perhaps he saw desperate hope, or perhaps he saw the look of a man who had finally discovered the solution to his grief-induced madness. But the crucial thing to remember about resembling someone powerful and dead in ancient Rome is that it rarely ended well. Sporus was about to learn that, in certain circumstances, resembling the wrong person could be far worse than committing any transgression. The Emperor had located his replacement. Now came the genuinely horrifying task of transforming Sporus into a suitable substitute for Poppaea. What transpired next was so barbaric and appalling that even the Romans, who routinely witnessed gladiatorial contests and public executions, were shocked. Nero decided that if Sporus was to assume Poppaea's role, he would need to be made more appropriate for the part. The Emperor's solution was castration. Pause for a moment to fully grasp the implications of this act. A slave was about to be brutally mutilated, not as a punishment for any wrongdoing, but simply because he had the temerity to resemble someone the Emperor mourned. It is difficult to conceive of a more twisted rationale. You remind me of my beloved departed wife, so I am going to inflict excruciating pain upon you and then force you to marry me. Even by the already warped standards of imperial insanity, this was an unprecedented level of depravity. The procedure itself was unimaginably brutal. In ancient Rome, castration was typically performed by crushing or severing the testicles, often without any form of anesthesia. Sporus would have been forcibly restrained, most likely screaming in agony, while Nero's physicians carried out this horrific mutilation. The survival rate for such procedures was extremely low. Many victims succumbed to blood loss or infection. Sporus's only stroke of fortune was that he was too valuable to Nero's twisted fantasy to be allowed to die. But the physical mutilation was just the start of Sporus's ordeal. Once he had recovered from the castration, assuming he survived the procedure, Nero initiated the process of transforming him into his vision of the perfect Poppaea substitute. The young man was compelled to wear women's attire. His hair was styled to mimic the deceased Empress's signature look, and he was meticulously trained to walk, talk, and behave like a Roman noblewoman. Imagine the psychological torment Sporus must have endured. Not only had he been physically mutilated, but his entire identity was being systematically erased and replaced with that of a dead woman. He was forced to become someone else entirely, someone who reminded his captor of his greatest love and his greatest crime. Then came the final, agonizing humiliation, the wedding ceremony. Nero actually married Sporus in a public spectacle, complete with all the traditional Roman wedding rituals. The emperor donned the toga of a Roman groom, while Sporus was dressed as a bride, complete with the flame-colored veil that Roman brides traditionally wore. The ceremony was attended by the Roman elite, who watched in stunned silence as their emperor married a castrated slave boy dressed as a woman. It was political theater at its most disturbing, a public display of imperial insanity that no one dared to interrupt. Welcome to the world's most twisted marriage, where one spouse was a delusional emperor and the other was a mutilated slave desperately trying to survive each day. Sporus's new life as Nero's wife was a constant performance, where a single misstep could result in dire consequences. Nero treated Sporus remarkably similar to how he had treated Poppaea, a fact that was both flattering and deeply unsettling. The emperor showered his new spouse with jewels, lavish clothing, and all the trappings of imperial luxury. Sporus was granted his own retinue of servants, resided in the most opulent chambers of the palace, and was addressed with the same titles that Poppaea had once held. On the surface, it appeared to be the quintessential rags-to-riches story. In reality, it was a gilded cage, constructed upon mutilation, forced identity, and imperial madness. But here's the unavoidable truth about pretending to be someone else around the clock. It's utterly exhausting. Sporus had to master not only how to dress and act like Poppaea, but also how to anticipate and react to Nero's moods, his reminiscences about the real Poppaea, and his increasingly unpredictable behavior. Imagine being forced to listen attentively while your captor recounts stories about the woman whose identity you have been forced to assume, the woman he murdered, and now professes to love through you. The Roman public's reaction to this spectacle was, to put it mildly, varied. Some were outraged by the blatant display of imperial excess. Others circulated hushed jokes behind closed doors, and many simply tried to ignore the situation entirely. After all, what does one say when their emperor marries a castrated slave? Congratulations on your unconventional union? The entire situation was so bizarre and unprecedented that even the gossip-loving Romans struggled to find words to describe it. Nero, meanwhile, appeared genuinely content with his arrangement. He would proudly present Sporus as his wife at public events, escort him to the theater, and even kiss him in public. In the emperor's delusional mind, this wasn't a sick charade. It was a successful resurrection. He had, in his own warped way, brought Poppaea back, and everything was once again perfect in his distorted reality. For Sporus, each day was a delicate balancing act. He had to be feminine enough to maintain the illusion, but not so much that he inadvertently triggered Nero's rage by reminding him too vividly of the real Poppaea. He had to be affectionate enough to keep the emperor happy, but not so independent that he appeared to possess a personality of his own. He was effectively living as a ghost of someone else, trapped in a never-ending performance. The psychological impact must have been devastating. Sporus wasn't simply a prisoner. He was a living monument to Nero's guilt and madness, a daily reminder of imperial violence disguised as imperial affection. In 68 AD, Nero's reign of terror finally came to an end. Confronted with widespread rebellions and a declaration by the Roman Senate branding him a public enemy, the emperor chose suicide over capture and humiliation. His reported final words were, "What an artist dies in me," underscoring his self-absorbed nature. For most Romans, Nero's death was a cause for celebration and relief. For Sporus, it marked the beginning of a new and equally terrifying chapter. What does one do with the castrated widow of a universally despised emperor? The answer, unfortunately, was nothing good. Enter Otho. Recall Poppaea's second husband, the one Nero had exiled to seize his wife? He returned and seized the throne. In the chaotic year of the four emperors, one might expect Otho to exhibit some compassion for another victim of Nero's obsessions. Instead, he decided to claim Sporus for himself. The rationale seemed to be that, if he could not reclaim his actual wife, the next best thing was the twisted replacement Nero had created. Sporus found himself passed around like imperial property, which in truth he was. Otho treated him as both a trophy and a symbol of revenge, a way to reclaim something Nero had stolen, even if it was a horrifically altered substitute. The irony of the situation was apparent to all. The man whose wife had been stolen by Nero was now marrying the slave Nero had mutilated to replace that same wife. Roman politics truly resembled a bloody and convoluted soap opera. However, Otho's reign lasted only 3 months before he lost a civil war and committed suicide. Sporus was once again without a protector, and his position was becoming increasingly precarious. Each new emperor had to decide what to do with this living embodiment of Nero's madness. The next emperor, Vitellius, adopted a different approach. Rather than marrying Sporus, he chose to humiliate him publicly. Vitellius forced Sporus to portray a raped maiden in gladiatorial games, effectively turning his trauma into entertainment for the masses. If you thought Sporus's life could not become any more degrading, you underestimated the creative depravity of Roman emperors. Finally, when Vespasian ascended to power and brought a semblance of order to the empire, Sporus saw his chance. Rather than await whatever new horrors the new emperor might devise, Sporus chose to reclaim control of his own destiny, something that had been denied to him for years. He took his own life, finally escaping the nightmare that had begun with nothing more than an unfortunate resemblance. Thus ends the tragic story of Sporus, the slave who was tormented simply because he resembled the wrong person at the wrong time. His face sealed his fate in ways that most of us can scarcely comprehend. What befell Sporus was unique because it starkly demonstrates how completely one person's reality can be warped by another's unchecked power. In a world where emperors could reshape laws, armies, and entire civilizations, reshaping a single human being was merely another act of arbitrary dominance. The Romans preserved this tale not because they found it particularly shocking, but because it perfectly encapsulated their understanding of power, that it reveals the true character of individuals when all restraints are removed. And in the chilling saga of Sporus, we see power stripped bare, revealing the monstrous depths of human cruelty and the enduring tragedy of a life stolen by a face. So, the story of Sporus isn't just a lurid tale from the annals of Roman history. It's a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked power and the fragility of identity when faced with the whims of those who wield it. It shows us how easily a life can be irrevocably altered, not by anything we do, but by simply being perceived a certain way by someone in authority. It's a chilling exploration of obsession, cruelty, and the human cost of imperial madness. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Sporus' story. What resonated with you the most? Do you have any questions about the historical context or the characters involved? Please feel free to leave a comment down below. I'm eager to hear your perspective and engage in a thoughtful discussion. And if you found this story as compelling and thought-provoking as I did, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future explorations of history's forgotten and often heartbreaking stories. Thanks for watching.